Yes, it's full. Good evening, everyone. At this 104th Sunday Sahityik session of iSPELL, we have Dr. Sourav Banerjee as keynote speaker. On behalf of iSPELL, I welcome sir.
Thank you, sir.
I welcome Dr. Sarita Jain, who will be chairing the session.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I welcome Professor Anupama, ma'am, the president of iSPELL, who is here as guest of honor. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, Kumar. Thank you so much.
And we have Master of Ceremonies, Sangamitra. Welcome, ma'am. I take this opportunity to introduce Sangamitra as Master of Ceremonies for this event.
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. A poet by bent and a teacher by profession, Sangamitra Konsam teaches English at Government Boys Higher Secondary School, Haplong, Assam. She completed her Masters in English from Cotton College. She did her B.Ed from a reputed college affiliated to Guwahati University. She took training as a master trainer for elementary teachers under British Council and SSA. She hosted several district-level academic, cultural functions and quiz competition at Dima Hasao district. She took to writing poem at the age of 8, and many of her poems and articles found pages in college magazines, IT magazines, and district academic souvenirs. Her recent poem entitled Mad Mighty Wind has been published in Provincial Creatives Literature Online. I heartily welcome Sangamitra ma'am and hand over the further proceedings of the event to you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you both, sir, for the gratifying vote of welcome and introduction. Sir, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Once again, a very good afternoon to all the esteemed participants present here today in this virtual platform.
Hello, ma'am. I think Sangamitra ma'am got disconnected.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are. Please.
This is Sunday Saturday of Indian Society for the Promotion of English Language and Literature. With this meaningful and valuable events that iSPELL organizes, it surely justifies the motto facilitate to elevate. Well, I'm again indeed very delighted to share the space as Master of Ceremonies to today's event. I do take the privilege again to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Sourav Banerjee, Chairperson, Dr. Sarita Janad, and Professor Anupam iSPELL India, and guest of honor in today's event. And the topic of today's event is Rethinking Diaspora, Texts, Contexts, Subtexts in Literature, Society, and Bollywood. I am glad to introduce Dr. Sourav Banerjee, the keynote speaker of today's event. Dr. Banerjee is an associate professor and head of the Department of English of a government-sponsored college affiliated to University of Calcutta. He has 20 years of teaching experience to his credit. He has done his PhD on the projection of cultural nationalism in the novels of Australian novelist David Malouf. He is an education ambassador, journal leader, brand ambassador of many societies of international repute. He is associated with numerous international projects, editorial and advisory boards as reviewer, book review editor of Journal of Ecohumanism, series editor of Tell Me Your Story to Name You. Dr. Banerjee has published many papers and articles in many national and international journals and delivered many keynote speeches and plenary addresses in India and abroad. He is the founder and vice president, administrative iSPELL West Bengal, and a member of IELTA India. He has led two international projects in collaboration with the University of Birmingham and the Oxford University Press, respectively. Dr. Banerjee has conducted interviews of academic stalwarts like Professor Bill Ashcroft, Professor Francesca Ferrando, Paul Sharath, Samantak Das, Professor B. Fraser, to name a few. His area of interest include Australian literature, post-colonialism, post-humanism, gender and cultural studies, Shakespearean drama, romantic poetry, mythology, and popular literature. He believes that the purpose of education is not merely the learning of facts and theories, but the training of the mind for better thinking and inner perception. Dr. Banerjee is writing a book on the Australian novelist Dick Mallof, and all the best in his future endeavor. With this, I have the honor to request Dr. Sourav Banerjee to take over the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for introducing me.
Thank you, sir.
A very good afternoon to all of you, and thanks to iSPELL India for this opportunity. So, am I visible and audible to everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So before I begin my talk, I'd actually like to share my screen. So just give me a minute, please. I'll be sharing my screen so that I can play my PowerPoint.
Sure, sir.
Yeah. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, sir. It is.
Okay. So now I'll begin my talk. I'll begin by saying that in my more than 2 decades of teaching career, I have come across many students who have complained that they find classes in general uninteresting because they can't relate the things that are being taught in class to their life. It resonated with my own experience with class 12 math. I could not understand where I could use differential calculus, inverse trigonometric functions, determinants, and so on in my everyday existence. Of course, they had their reasons, but it was not very obvious to me, unlike class 10 math, where we did percentages, profit and loss, and so on and so forth. And the same, unluckily, seems to be the case with how we impart education in our classes, even today. We talk a lot of theories, we talk about a lot of theories and isms in the class without trying to understand if the students are able to either grasp the concepts or relate them to their immediate surroundings or daily existence. So what I do is I try to relate theories or concepts with society and popular media, things that I feel that the students are immediately able to relate to. And in today's talk, too, I will do the same. So I will deal with the concept of diaspora, not only in literary text, but also in society and Bollywood movies. So I have structured my talk today into 3 parts. In the first part, I will deal with diasporas in history and society. In the second part, I'll deal with writers and text. And in the third part and the final one, I will be dealing with 3 Bollywood movies. So let me start, and to start with very simple and basic things, I would begin by saying that in its simplest form, migration may be defined as movement from one country, place, or locality to another. Now, ever since the ancient humans originating on the African continent migrated to Eurasia and elsewhere, humans have been on the move. But to talk in more precise terms, diaspora as a concept and a particular phenomenon of migration has a double origin. Now, etymologically, I'm sorry, just give me a minute. Etymologically, it comes from the Greek verb diasperian, dia meaning across, and Syrian meaning to scatter. Historically, it refers to the dispersal of the Jews from their ancestral land after the destruction of the Second Temple in 586 BCE. This term, diaspora, was a neologism coined by the translators of the Hebraic Bible into Greek in the 3rd century BC. Though originally associated with the Jewish diaspora, the term was later used to refer to other diasporas and has been applied to the involuntary displacement of other peoples. For example, the African, Armenian, and Irish diaspora. Based on the Jewish prototypical case, the concept has been commonly defined as encompassing a collective identity shaped by the trauma that accompanies a group post-departure from its ancestral land and its emotional and material attachment to the origins that is sustained by the desire to return home or by symbolic manifestations of nostalgia. Although scholars have identified different kinds of diasporas, let's say labor diaspora, trading diaspora, imperial diasporas, the term has maintained its emphasis on dislocation and loss, evoking at once the experience and politics of disposition and ethnic identification. Now, much later, in the second half of the 20th century, the term diaspora took on a broader meaning. In the sense we refer to it now, often being used synonymously with migration, as in the cases of the migrations from the Eastern European nations to Western Europe or the United States between the two world wars. The Empire Windrush generation of West Indians who relocated to the United Kingdom, the Asian and South Asian diasporas in America, the United Kingdom and Canada. These more recent diasporas are no longer religious diasporas. And while immigration is defined as an individual venture, the collective dimension is central to the diasporic experience, as diasporas are not only made up of individuals, but also of groups of people who leave their home country. From the societal point of view, therefore, we find that despite their relocation to a new land, diasporas maintain a strong bond with their homeland. Diasporas are therefore often associated with nostalgia, a mood that is largely reflected in their cultural productions, particularly in literature and film. And that is exactly why I have decided to talk about diasporas today in relation to society, literature, and Bollywood.
Yes, sir.
Now, talking about diasporas, presently 3% of the world's total population, that is around at least 258 million people, live outside their countries of origin. And coming to Indian diaspora, migration is nothing new to India. India not only has the highest diaspora in the world, if I'm not wrong, around 18 million living outside in other countries, but can also boast of having one of the world's most diverse and complex migration histories. Since the 19th century, ethnic Indians have established communities on every continent. Again, the composition of these migrants has evolved over time from mainly bonded labor in far-flung colonies to post-war labor for British industries to the highly skilled professionals in North America and low-skilled workers in the Middle East. Now, to go back a little bit of history, following the abolition of slavery by the British in 1833, their colonies urgently needed manpower, particularly on the sugar and rubber plantations. Now, to meet this demand, the British established an organized system of temporary labor migration from the Indian subcontinent. This system remained in place for about 80 years before it was criticized and abolished in 1916 for being, quote unquote, a new form of slavery. But by that time, more than 1.5 million Indians had been shipped to colonies in the Caribbean, Africa, and Oceania. During roughly the same period, another form of labor migration was taking place for the tea, coffee, and rubber plantations in Sri Lanka, Malaya, which is part of the present-day Malaysia, and Burma. The managers of these plantations were recruiting entire families from South India and shipping them off to these plantations. This system was commonly referred to as the Kangani system for Sri Lanka and Malaya and the Maestri system for Burma. It has been estimated that about 6 million people had left the Indian shores by the time this system was abolished in 1938. Now, in addition Members of India's trading communities migrated and settled in many countries, like the Gujarati merchants in East Africa and traders from Kerala and Tamil Nadu in Burma, Ceylon, Sri Lanka presently, and Malaya, which is presently Malaysia. Emigration to the United Kingdom and North America started only during colonial rule in India. However, the number of immigrants was insignificant at the beginning, largely comprising of educated Parsis and Bengalis. We know that it was so because India had restricted the issuance of passports, that is from the year 1930 onwards, to limit this migration of less educated Indians to Britain in an attempt to stop them from becoming destitute there. But after the decision by the Indian Supreme Court in 1966, making right to travel a fundamental right under the Indian Constitution, unskilled, skilled, and professional workers migrated from India to the United Kingdom. This was facilitated by the United Kingdom's Commonwealth immigration policy, which allowed citizens of a Commonwealth country to live, work, vote, and hold public office in the United Kingdom. So between 1995 and 2005, half of Europe-bound Indians immigrated, half of Europe-bound Indian immigrants headed to the United Kingdom alone. Substantial Indian migration to North America started only in the late 60s. Both in the United States and Canada, major changes in immigration policy increased immigration. In the United States, the 1965 Immigration Act quotas made it possible for high-skilled immigrants, including Indians, to gain permanent residence and bring their family members. It is no wonder then that Indian citizens are by far the top recipients of H-1B visas each year. Even Indians immigrating to Canada increased quite noticeably in the first half of the 21st century. Canada was home to at least 500,000 Indians. Australia and New Zealand became important destinations for Indian immigrants since the 1990s. And Indian immigrants account for 3.3% of all immigrants to Australia. Now, when it comes to theorizing the diaspora studies is a field of scholarship that has developed at the crossroads of cultural and literary studies, the social sciences, history, and even political science since the late 1970s, at a time when Western nations started to take stock of the magnitude of contemporary migration, both present and still to come. Sometimes considered as an offshoot of post-colonial studies, the field of diaspora studies shares a similar interest in questions of political and epistemic domination, subalternity, race, gender, language, and even, of course, identity. In the 1990s, I can say that the emphasis was largely on issues of identity and belonging. But since then, the field of diaspora studies has developed considerably in terms of both literary output and scholarship, taking on board key issues in the societies involved. Now it becomes very important to understand and draw a distinction between exile and diaspora before attempting to define what diaspora literature is. The difference between exile and diaspora may lie in the attitude towards the homeland and towards migration. Exile emphasizes the forced nature of the migration and the freshness of the experience of leaving the homeland. Exile is not neutral. I repeat, not neutral. And exiled people usually possess a single-minded desire to return to their homeland. In contrast, living in diaspora may assume a certain accommodation to living away from the homeland and a sense that it is possible to survive and even thrive in the adopted country. So diaspora implies a more neutral, or even if I may say, a more positive view than exile does. According to Halverson Taylor, diasporic literature may be mindful of the ancestral native land, but the nostalgia for it has lessened, if not disappeared. And diasporic literature is, moreover, engaged by the possibilities of a new location. Diasporic living stops short of assimilation because the community still maintains its distinctive identity and its status as a minority people. The best example would perhaps be the Jews. Wherever they say their identity as the Jews is very strong. Okay. Now, if you move on to the writers of the Indian diaspora, they have been at the center stage in the last 2 decades, chiefly because of the theoretical formulations generated by their work. These writers are often preoccupied with the elements of nostalgia as they seek to locate themselves into new cultures. They write in relation with the culture of their homeland and at the same time adopt and negotiate with the cultural space of the host land. However, looking at diasporic literature in a broader perspective, it can be seen that such literature helps in understanding various cultures, breaking the barriers between different countries, localizing the global, and even spreading universal peace. Diasporic or expatriate writers negotiate boundaries, construct new identities, harp upon memories, and live on the margins of 2 countries and create cultural theory. Kim Butler had commented that since 1960, as the numbers of transplanted people increased, communities that were once differentiated as immigrants, nomadic, or exiled also began to be called diaspora. So diasporas possess an ambiguous status of being both a refugee and an ambassador. As refugees, they look for security and protection, and as ambassadors, they project their own culture and help enhance its comprehensibility. The Indian diasporic community has shown great sense of adjustment, adaptability, mobility, and accessibility. The sense of homelessness that every immigrant suffers is genuine and intense nonetheless. But in recent times, it has been seen that this concept has been minimized and made less intense through their social networking and sense of solidarity. Now, the chief characteristic features of the Indian diasporic writing are the quest for identity. I am simplifying, definitely I'm oversimplifying, but these are the main points that come out. Quest for identity, uprooting and rerouting, insider and outsider syndrome, nostalgia, nagging sense of guilt, etc. The diasporic writers turn to their homeland for various reasons. For example, V.S. Naipaul, who is in a perpetual quest for his roots, turned to India for the same. Salman Rushdie visits India to mythologize its history. Rohinton Mistry visits and revisits India for a kind of revitalization and to re-energize his aching soul. Bharti Mukherjee revisits her childhood memories time and again. Now, in the past, Indians were intellectually fed on the thoughts of Dickens, Hardy, and Scott and the like. But today, we can safely say that people all over the world are being nourished by the writers of the Indian diaspora. These writers, through their literary contributions, have greatly enriched the English literature. They have been aiming at reinventing India through the rhythms of ancient legends, the cadences of mythology, the complexities of another civilization, and nostalgia. It is in this sense very post-colonial because I distinctly remember that when I was talking to Professor Bill Ashcroft in one of my interviews, he had particularly said that there is no hyphen between post and colonialism. It is not two words hyphenated. It is a single word. Post-colonialism does not start after colonial rule ends. It starts from the very moment colonial rule starts. Therefore, according to him, if we take that to be true, and as Shakespeare, Caliban had said that you taught me language to pursue it, you taught me language, and my profit on that is that I can curse you in your language. So the diasporic writers can be taken in the same vein, not necessarily that they are cursing the British or the United Kingdom, but they are using their language to project to showcase our civilization to them and even enrich their civilization. So they dive deep into the realms of imagination and the ocean of memory to paint something quite different and distinct from that portrayed by fellow Western writers. So they are adding another dimension to this form of literature. The writers of the Indian diaspora write about India, painting the vastness and the complexities of the home country, which contains everything in multitude, multiple truths, multiple crises, multiple realities, and this diversity is portrayed for the worldwide reading public. Just a second, let me just have a sip of water. Now, Indian diasporic writing can be divided into two categories: writings emerging from forced migration and writings emerging from voluntary migration. Forced migration is when the writers are forced to move out of the country due to various reasons. Voluntary migration, on the other hand, is when Indian writers voluntarily opt to move out of India to settle abroad. These divisions, therefore, harbor the Indian writers who then either criticize the country or praise it. The major contributors are writers like Salman Rushdie and V.S. Naipaul, as I've already said, who are accepted as world citizens. And Indian English writers like Anita Desai, Bharti Mukherjee, Shashi Tharoor, Amitabh Ghosh, Vikram Seth, Rohinton Mistry, and even Jhumpa Lahiri, who have established themselves as fine writers in the tradition of the Indian diasporic writing. To give a few examples, Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children clearly shows how one culture overlaps with the other. Earlier, people used to travel abroad without any conscious knowledge of boundaries that existed. However, today the scenario has changed and immigrants become acutely aware of the sense of displacement. They are forced to accept the cultural displacement, and the state of the migrants remains problematic as they are just not able to delete the memory of their native land from their mind. Jhumpa Lahiri, in her book, The Namesake, relates the aspects and themes of the novel to the immigrants' experiences. She expresses the emotion of the novel and its linkage to the immigrant experience in a rather dispassionate way. The complexities of a diasporic identity and the immigrant experiences are reflected in the way the novel presents Gogol's situation. He is aware that his parents and their friends and the children of their friends and all his own friends from high school will never call him anything but Gogol. And in another part of the book, Ashima realizes that being a foreigner is like a lifetime pregnancy, a perpetual wait, a continuous feeling of being out of sorts. Now, both these instances truly reflect the confused identity which comes as part of such an act of migration. And lastly, there is an element of connection to one's homeland and the historical understanding which needs to be taken into consideration. Dispersal from the homeland usually leads to a strong sense of connection to the homeland, which is maintained by describing the cultural practices and the way of life. According to the political scientist William Safran, if I may quote, those who are away from their homeland will have a collective memory of it, unquote. But this quote unquote homeland might be imaginary rather than real. That is what they remember the homeland as, or is their homeland, and not what the homeland has become is their homeland. This feeling to get back to one's homeland encourages people to maintain their relationship with their ancestral roots, thus forming a type of ancestral impulse. This bond with the homeland eventually leads to a historical understanding of their homeland, which often takes the form of personal memory. Indian diasporic writings become really important as they provide the readers a wide range of views and opinions on India as a country and cultural space. It also throws light on the traditions and social status of the Indians. The most reoccurring elements, if I may say so, in each of these Indian diasporic books is the element of Indianness within quotes, due to which these writings often present to the reader a view of the Indian culture and its flavors. The quote unquote home is a mythical place in diasporic literature. In this sense, it becomes a place where no return is possible. But even if it is possible to revisit the geographical territory, the affection or affections attached to it gets lost somewhere. And in this connection, I will talk a little about Bharati Mukherjee and her novel Desirable Daughter. Now, this novel portrays a modern diaspora. It embodies the idea of voluntary migration, where a person chooses to leave his or her homeland and settle in another country and tries to assimilate in that host land. Mukherjee's perception of diaspora is a very complex one because her characters encounter cultural conflict after displacement. However, most of her characters overcome these conflicts and discover themselves in America. Mukherjee's personal life has been or had been a series of displacements, moving to London from Kolkata with her family in 1947, then to Switzerland, and then coming back to Kolkata in 1951 to spend the golden years of her childhood. Then again, she moved to the US as a graduate student in 1961, and finally to Canada in 1966 after her marriage to live in exile in a place she had famously called, and I quote, my husband's desh, my husband's country, that is. However, her year-long trip to Kolkata, or Calcutta as it was called then, in 1973 changed her perception of immigration, because she then saw that Calcutta had changed from the Calcutta that she had seen and remembered. So it occurred to her that she could only keep her Calcutta alive in voluntary exile. This experience in Calcutta urged her to try and assimilate in Canada and embrace her new identity as an Indian expatriate. But the Asian immigration to Canada increased during the 1970s, resulting in discrimination against these communities. And Mukherjee's attempt to assimilate ended up to no avail because of the racist attitudes, and I'm sorry to say this, but this is very true, the racist attitude of the Canadians, which reshaped her ideas about immigration and et al. Mukherjee's perspective on diaspora is in fact very interesting. She views diaspora as a process of discovering the self and developing. In her article, Beyond Multiculturalism, Surviving the 90s, she notes that most writers perceive diaspora as the destination of arrival or the point where one uproots him or herself from the ethnic culture. However, she believes that diaspora is a process of self-integration within quotes. Mukherjee rejects being hyphenated. She labels herself as an American. She does not label herself as an Indian American or American Indian, whatever. She is an American, but that does not mean that she hates India. It is the desire to define her own identity that she chooses rather than be defined by others' expectations. Now, seen from these perspectives, her novel Desirable Daughters is a reflection of her diasporic experience and perception. It tells the story of three sisters from Calcutta, Padma, Podda as we call it in Bengali, Parvati, and Tara, and their process of immigration and adaptation in a new environment. They all share the same ethnic Indian background, but their displacement separates them. Podda or Padma and Tara leave for America, while Parvati stays in India. Tara, who's the protagonist, and Padma adapt to the culture of the host society in different ways, showing the different paths that an Indian immigrant can lead in America. Tara leads a calm life in America till she meets her nephew Chris, who invades her privacy, forcing her to investigate her past. She then embarks on a journey to find her true identity. Her identity can be examined from three perspectives. First, how she views her old Indian self and family. Second, how she perceives her new self after her dislocation to a new place and culture. And third, finally, how she is perceived by her native people and the people of the host land as well. Despite her attempts to break free from the restrictions imposed upon her by her Indian identity and to assimilate in the American culture, she finds out that she will always be linked to her homeland. Through her journey, she finally learns to accept both the Indian and American aspects of her identity. Her identity undergoes three phases in America: torn identity, assimilating identity, and finally a hybrid one. Tara's identity development and reconstruction can be read in the light of intersectionality theory, which examines the ways that race, class, gender, and sexuality work to create inequalities for women. Again, speaking in general terms, the first generation of Indian immigrants carries with them to the host society a socio-cultural baggage which contains language, religion, tradition, dress, etc. But there isn't a uniform way of adapting to host countries. It varies from community to community and even from person to person, depending on many factors. We find that there are at least three modes of adaptation followed by Indian immigrants. The first is that they may assimilate in the new culture, or the second is that they may adjust themselves to the new society while still holding on to their homeland. And finally, C is a third one is that they struggle to be dominant through active political participation. Now, looking at it optimistically, for the many of the Indians who have left their motherland to seek anchors in various other countries, diasporic literature has helped in providing a link between India and the rest of the world. And this coming together has created a tremendous self-confidence and awareness that they are articulate, artistic, talented, creative, practical, and adaptable. And this awareness is achieved not only through the medium of literature, but also through the popular medium of film. And it is here that I will then move on to the next and the last part of my talk, that is Indian diaspora and Bollywood. So again, I'll ask for a minute for a sip of water.
Sure, sir, sure.
Yeah, so the Indian film industry has recently become the subject of a large body of scholarly literature. There's no denying that. Whether we love it or hate it, we just cannot ignore it. But I have very consciously used the term Bollywood and not Indian cinema or Bombay cinema. Not because it is a more stylized term, but because Bollywood represents certain things that Indian cinema or Bombay cinema does not. The name Bollywood, as we all know, is derived from the combination of Hollywood and Bombay, and it is also a tongue-in-cheek term created by the English language press in India in the late 1970s and referred to the prolific and box office-oriented Hindi language film industry located in Bombay. It is a part of, and yet very distinct from, a much larger Indian film industry, which produces feature films in various centers in about 20 local languages. To oversimplify, the major difference between Bombay cinema and Bollywood is that after the globalization and India's financial liberation in the 1990s, led by Manmohan Singh, finance minister, and P.V. Narasimha Rao, if I'm not wrong, who was the prime minister at that point in time, these films made in Bombay veered away from the Nehruvian socialism mode to the ones made with an international audience in mind and dealing with urban and rich characters and foreign locations. These films are the ones that are disseminated around the world and are talked about. Their international flavor and slightly more westernized production values make them particularly exportable to the global Indian diaspora. However, They do share stylistic characteristics, spectacular songs and dance routines, lavish sets, melodrama with Indian films in general. Thus, Bollywood has become a shorthand reference not only to a specific industry, but also to a specific style of filmmaking within the industry, which is aggressively oriented towards box office success and broad audience appeal. Bollywood, as I use the term here, also needs to be distinguished from the films made by diasporic Indians living and working abroad. The first name that comes to my mind is Gurvinder Chadha, Bend It Like They Come, whose work, although is set in a Bollywood style idiom, has a different political and cultural agenda. So we'll not be discussing that. Now, I will analyze 3 globally successful Bollywood movies that deal with Indian diasporic characters. They are Aditya Chopra's Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge and Karan Johar's Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum and Kal Ho Na Ho. Sorry. And I'm very sure, all of you, most of you have seen these films or know about them.
Yes.
So
yes,
these films show the cultural face of India in the transnational setting. Like in literature, in films too, the nationalistic pride and longing for the motherland is seen in the constant nostalgia and great emotion with which the Indian expatriates refer to India. Apna Desh, my country. Hamare Desh ki mitti, my country soil. And Apna Bharat, my India again. Now, talking of DDLJ, that's Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, first, the first scene of this film is a prime example of what I have been talking so far, where the father, Chaudhary Baldev Singh, played by the famous Amrish Puri, constantly keeps referring to India and Punjab as Apna Desh, Apna Punjab, while the scenes flicker between Punjab's yellow mustard fields and London's famous Trafalgar Square, juxtaposing the two places in the film's narrative and highlighting the contrast between the posh, well-known tourist attractions to the nameless mustard fields with a girl running through it wearing a salwar kameez. I'm sure you remember the scene.
yes.
Baldev's very own attire is a blend of Western and Indian clothes, symbolizing the lifestyle he leads even after living in London for so long. This lifestyle has also been passed on to his family. His 2 daughters wear salwar kameez and other Indian clothes while at home. And what is most interesting is that they have impeccable Indian body language and perfect Hindi accents for second generation NRI offspring. Baldev's affinity with national identity is also presented through his efforts to reconnect with India by trying to arrange a marriage for his elder daughter, Simran, played by Kajol, with the son of his best friend in Punjab. While Baldev's family signifies the era of struggle prior to migration, when Indians had to struggle to succeed in local business, the protagonist Raj, played by Shah Rukh Khan, and his family represents the more recent era of successful enterprising NRIs who have achieved success working with IT companies. In sharp contrast to Baldev, who is a conservative father and who wants his children to remain true Indian, Raj Malhotra is a carefree rich boy nurtured in a very liberal environment. While he is shown with expensive cars and lack of concern for money, yet he is later shown to be appreciative of his Indian roots and values when interacting with Simran, the film's heroine. There is a scene in the movie when Simran wakes up in Raj's clothes and assumes that they had spent a drunken night together. Simran grows very upset because of her conservative Indian sexual morality, and Raj consoles her by saying, and I quote, "I am a Hindustani. I know what honor means for a Hindustani woman. Don't worry, nothing has happened between us." Now, this episode in the film shows that despite being second generation NRIs, Raj and Simran are still in touch with their Indian values. Are fully aware of the traditional Indian code of conduct before marriage. Raj's Hindustani values are also seen in the way he refuses to challenge Baldev's authority by eloping with Simran even when Simran wants it, and his willingness to stick to Baldev's law for the sake of changing his negative impression of him so that he may be able to ask for Simran's hand in marriage according to Indian traditions. Because marriage in Indian tradition is not a bond between two people, but it's a bond between two families. This is taken further in later scenes when Raj manages to make a place for himself in Simran's marriage house with the motive of making, with the motive of seeking Baldev's blessing while still being close to Simran. Songs like Mehendi Laga Ke Rakhna, Doli Saja Ke Rakhna again highlight the importance of the traditional Mehendi and Doli for the Indian bride. Thus, DDLJ succeeds in depicting the Indian diaspora as Indians who could uphold and appreciate Indian culture and value systems even in the face of Western temptation while living abroad. Now, coming to the next one, Karan Johar's Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum, or K3G as I will refer to it henceforth, similarly shows that once you embrace your true cultural identity, you become a better person who is more acceptable in society. This is seen in the change in Kareena Kapoor's character, Pooja, or popularly called Poo. Pooja, the ultimate NRI brat, who has wholly embraced the British culture. She is like the embodiment of an NRI who has embraced the entire thing, entire British culture. She has replaced her Indian identity by shortening her traditional Indian name of Pooja to Poo while living in London, where skimpy Western clothes is loud and audacious and associates herself with the other fellow NRI blacks living the same lifestyle. She represents the Indian diaspora who is very, very eager to blend into the host culture.
Right.
But once Rohan, played by Hrithik Roshan, the archetypal beacon of change in the movie, enters the transplanted portion of the Raisand family in London, Pooja returns to her Indian morals and values when he pulls her towards their common cultural space, excuse me, and makes her realize the significance of her culture. Pooh immediately starts dressing more Indian, has a new appreciation for traditional Hindu practices, and tries to show her nationalistic pride by teaching her nephew's school choir excuse me, the Indian national anthem. This change is greeted with smiles by everyone, including Anjali and Rahul. That is Anjali played by Kajol, and again Rahul is Shahrukh Khan, who are her caretakers in this movie. Anjali plays the role of the Indian vessel in this movie. She epitomizes India to the NRI audience with the way she manages her own family in London, insisting on sticking to Indian customs, be prayers, songs, food, or dress. She also has this obsessive desire to help out any Indian, even if he's a stranger. So the sole reason why Rohan, played by Hrithik Roshan, was allowed to stay in their house was because Anjali fought for his cause, as he was from Bharat with no place to stay. As the embodiment of the Indian representation, she tries to bring in the true culture of India into London spaces instead of trying to modify herself to suit the cultural practice of the host land. Anjali's apprehension of the fact, of the fact that her son might become too anglicized, reinforces the need to inculcate the values of Hamara Desh, Hamara Dharam, Hamara Sanskriti, our country, our religion, our culture into her song. Anjali essentially personifies what the directors do to evoke nationalistic nostalgia in their diasporic audience. Again, in this movie, there are constant reminders of India's great entity and its omnipresent spirit. This is seen in the montage of shots when Rohan lands in London. While he walks past numerous tourist attractions and designer shops and easily navigates through the diaspora, India's national song, Vande Mataram, plays in the background. British blondes and brunettes walk past the busy streets wearing the Indian salwar kameez. There are street performances of Bharatnatyam, while Indian women run past Rohan wearing tricolor dupattas. In addition, the colors of the national flag are constantly seen while Rohan is in London, as if to imply that even in a foreign land, the entire continent of India is behind him every step of the way. But another very important thing that this iconic montage is also a figurative representation of India's rising consumerism is that in the span of about 12 seconds, more than 10 different high-class designer brands are projected, like Dolce & Gabbana, Starbucks, Coffee Republic, Giorgio Armani, Versace, Yves Saint Laurent, Mac Mara, etc. Karan Johar uses this strategy to exploit his new expatriate market by providing them and pleasing them with the already familiar high-class brand. This is representative of India's relationship with neo-conservatism and consumerism, with nationalistic patriotism and capitalism. Inspired by this newly liberated Indian economy and financial motivation, the protagonist's family visually depicts the social change in capitalist values in the way Rahul and his father travel in helicopters and Rohan drives Lamborghinis and sports bikes. Hence, the NRI becomes the icon to further capitalism in India and abroad, while still bringing the Indian homeland to the host land. Thus, the NRI evolved from one who was able to uphold Indian traditions to one who could also incorporate Indian socio-cultural values into their cosmopolitan lifestyles abroad. And now I come to the final film of my talk, and in the final part. In terms of commercial success, Karan Johar's Kal Ho Na Ho is another popular film that deals with the same issues, albeit a little differently. Unlike DDLJ or K3G, where the non-Indianness of the people around the central characters was something that was looked down upon, Kal Ho Na Ho used and celebrated racial diversity in its songs and dance to emphasize the role of India in the chaos of cultures in America. For example, the song Pretty Woman is set in an American residential area where people of all ages and race congregate to sing the half English, half Hindi song, showing harmony. An interesting thing to note is that while in the movie, the adoption of American values and culture isn't viewed negatively, the Indian culture still acts as a safety net to fall back upon in times of need. Naina is played by Preeti Zinta. Naina's family business only begins to succeed once they embrace their Indian culture and try to commercialize it by converting their restaurant theme to Indian. Also, again, the Indian flag is brandished when things are finally turning around for Naina and her family, which shows that only when you embrace your Indianness and reconnect with your roots, that problems begin to resolve and you achieve success. Like K3G, the close-knit Indian family system and values are incorporated heavily into the film, with constant performances of religious and ethnic events to evoke nostalgia in the film's intended NRI audience. The traditional dances and songs in traditional situations, the songs Mahi Ve in Naina's Punjabi or Sikh engagements, are specifically created to promote Indian nationalism in the NRI audience. Also, like K3G, in Kal Ho Na Ho, too, images of New York, its attraction and well-known brands are used to tease the Indian audience with the familiarity and the American grandness. Outlook critic Namrata Joshi says, and I quote here, just give me a minute, Karan might have got the geography of New York wrong, but quite interestingly, he manages to portray it like an Indian city, a place where Gujjus and Punjabis can melt, unquote. And now, in contrast to the previous two films, Kal Ho Na Ho is a film where the NRI portrayed feel no desire to go back to India. About such characters, social scientist Siv Viswanathan says, these kind of NRIs don't carry the baggage of roots. They can die in America and still remain Indian. On another note, Kal Ho Na Ho uses religion to represent numerous phases of characterization where characters can legitimize their actions and also show the innumerable religious options available for the Indian. Essentially, it shows that for every Indian, regardless of any specific tradition, religion plays an important role in their day-to-day lives. Naina is the personified image of the chaos of religions available for the NRI. Her character is a Christian. She is living with a Punjabi grandmother and a Hindu aunt. She represents the blending of religions in the foreign land, but being an Indian who is typically used to a plethora of gods, she is comfortable in her surroundings. Thus, the quote-unquote successful NRI evolved from being one who is able to uphold Indian values, traditions, and morals to one who has not lost his connection with his cultural and religious traditions, despite living the cosmopolitan life abroad. So now I'll conclude. So in conclusion, I can only say that films like DDLJ, K3G, and Kal Ho Na Ho provide an escape for the diasporic Indian audience to come back to their homeland culture and experience life in India again. Specifically designed to cater to the NRI's nostalgic needs, these films are indeed the stars of the diasporic genre of Bollywood, from which other Indian diasporic films like Salam Namaste, Kabhi Alvida Na Kehna, Love Aajkal, and Swadesh, these are the ones that come to my mind immediately, have come forward. Now, due to these movies from the early 1990s to the current times, the image of the diaspora was converted from being a person who was initially thought to have betrayed his country and migrated to the West for better opportunities to becoming someone representing the entirety of India in a multi-ethnic land. They have become the mainstream icons that we now know, living the lavish international lifestyle with Indian morals and cultures, all the while continuing to add layers of meaning to the diasporic population in a way understandable even to the common masses who might shy away from literary theories and texts and classrooms. Thank you for bearing with me so long. With this, I end.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for such an enriching and analytical approach to the whole thing, sir. It was essentially, I believe it was essentially diverse. The topic was diverse and very informative. And so the way you have correlated from history to society to Bollywood and given a very positive picture of the entire diasporic movies or diasporic the mindset that the diasporic writers carry forward and they write something. So it has all been very positive and it has all been very informative, sir. And I'm sure many of the speculations that the listeners have here must have been fed. And I do not see many questions here. If there is any question that any of our participants wants to put up, they can come up with some questions to Dr. Sourav Banerjee. I think we are not coming up with any questions.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So meanwhile, so like it's been really very, very enriching and very, very analytical at the same time, very entertaining, and it sounded very nice to me. So, if I have to ask you a question,
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. So going entirely through your talk, you have said that the diasporic writers enriched English literature. Yes, in the beginning you used the term, but yeah. So will it be? I mean, like, will it be right to ask you that is it the diasporic writers who are making it? Who are making the Indian tradition, the Indian values, the Indian customs more deeper in their projection than the writer who are in India?
See, that is a very good question. So if I think I got your question, what you are trying to ask is that, like, I said the reverse, that I had quoted Shakespeare's Caliban, and I said that what he told Prospero is that he taught me language, and my profit on that is that I can curse you in your language. So the British taught us English, and our profit on learning English that we can write back to them. The empire writes back, we can write back to them, and we can show them that we can write in English, and therefore showcase our culture to you. But what you're asking is that if the diasporic writers have enriched our culture? Definitely they have. Definitely they have. I do believe they have, because I mean, even if you have to fight your enemy, you have to then know the entirety of your enemy. You cannot say that this language is bad or that person is bad without understanding that language or without knowing the nuances of that person. So even when you're criticizing or fighting somebody, it is very important that you know about that person inside out. So
Yes, sir.
we feel that our culture, our literature, our cultural values, everything is so strong and so good. But what is the yardstick of measuring the goodness? So once when we read those diasporic writers who stay abroad and who give us a kind of a yardstick to measure our culture by, so like I know that when I read Salman Rushdie, who's been living in London and UK and whatever, then I know that what their culture is like and what our culture is like through his novels. Not that I have been to London or I have been to UK or USA. I have seen that culture, but when I see characters who are behaving in the Indian way and characters who are behaving in the English way or the American way, I can definitely relate my culture, compare directly my culture and contrast them to the other cultures. And therefore, I can see where there is even a lacuna or some kind of a fault with my culture. And if I can correct that, if I can add that thing into my culture to make it better, it is always good. And therefore, they have these diasporic writers have definitely added new layers and new meanings, not only to the cultures of their host lands, but also to our native culture. That is absolutely true. I completely agree with this, and that was a very good question.
Thank you, sir. We do not have much question to take here. So I'd like to move on to our chairperson.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, sir. The chairperson of today's event is Dr. Sarita Jain, an associate professor in the Department of English in Government College, Dudu, Jaipur, Rajasthan, with the teaching experience covering about her research paper, 45 in number, are published in various national, international, and UC journal and books like Jatila from Indonesia, American Research Journal from Chicago, to mm, name a few, and presented papers in several national and international platforms. She has been the master trainer of Global Skills Enhancement Program, also trained by Project High Tech, a joint venture of the United States Embassy and Department of Education, Rajasthan. She is actively involved in writing poetry on online platforms. She has authored 2 books and edited 9 books. She was awarded uh, doctorate by Indian Council of Social Science Research, New Delhi, in 2015. She is also the Vice President of Rajasthan iSPELL Forum. She is the editorial member of multiple groups of journals like Kambhowell Publishers, Multan, Pakistan, IJCRT, and JETIR. She received Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan Award for Education from Arpita Foundation, Vrindavan in 2021. She is also honored with Great Global Award from Arpita Foundation, Vrindavan in April 2022. Her areas of interest include English language teaching, poetry reading, gender studies, diaspora studies, and cultural studies. With pleasure, I would like to invite Dr. Sarita Jain, Madam, to kindly chair the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. At the outset, I thank Dr. Ghanshyam sir and iSPELL India for providing me the honor of chairing the session. Dr. Banerjee has imparted an enlightening and thought-provoking deliberation. He has provided an in-depth and comprehensive insight on diasporic literature and cinema. He starts his deliberation with the derivation of the word diaspora, that it is derived from the Greek word diasporian. That means die means across and sporian means to scatter. And he also talks about the dispersal of Jews from ancestral land after the destruction of the second temple in 586 BC. He says that about 258 million people live outside of their country, and Indian diaspora is the largest with around 18 million people. And these people, they migrated from south to work in sugar and rubber plantations to Burma, Malaya, Sri Lanka, and even merchants and traders from Gujarat, Kerala, Tamil Nadu. They also migrated to Burma, Ceylon, and East Africa and Malaya. And he also discusses about the rights given by Supreme Court to the citizens. The term diaspora that once described Jewish, Greek, and Armenian diasporian now shares meanings with a larger semantic domain that includes words like immigration, expatriate, refugee, guest worker, exile, community, overseas community, ethnic community. Modern diasporas are ethnic minority groups of migrant origins residing and acting in host countries but maintaining strong sentimental and material links with their countries of origin, that is their homelands. The common element are that diasporas are created by the permanent forced expulsion or voluntary emigration of a group from the homeland and the settlement in one or more countries. There they remain minorities. However, they retain a communal sense of ethnic and or religious identity and solidarity while fostering a myth of the original lost homeland or even a desire to return there. Now, Vertovec uh, uh, identifies three ways in which the concept of diaspora is used across a range of academic disciplines. That is, diaspora as a social form, as a type of consciousness, and as a mode of cultural production. Now, he also, Dr. Banerjee has distinguishes between exile and diaspora. Exile is not neutral and diaspora is neutral. He says that the chief features of diasporic writings are quest for identity, then uprooting, rerouting, insider and outsider syndrome, and nostalgia. In Dr. Banerjee's deliberation, the exploration of diasporic narratives of homeland and hostland is explored by examining these narratives across two mediums, the cinematic and the literary. The diasporic texts are agents of cultural production, focusing on interpretative possibilities of the literary critical mode of reading and enabling nuanced modes of analysis attentive to issues of diasporic identity, the identity of nation states, and the emergent global dynamics of migrant narratives. The text explores, unravels, and analyzes the challenges posed by these re-articulated notions of home and belonging in order to comprehensively represent the post-colonial realities of migration. Dr. Banerjee talks about the works of diasporic writers. He refers to diasporic writers such as V.S. Naipaul, Salman Rushdie, Rohinton Mistry, Bharti Mukherjee. And he says that the works of diasporic writers such as Bharti Mukherjee and Kiran Desai, they reflect upon temporal and spatial movement looking backward and forward, and the deterritorialization and reterritorializations which are connected by travel. Texts like Desai's The Inheritance of Loss or Mukherjee's The Tree Bride juxtapose journeys between India and the USA, home and adopted country, new homeland and history. Rushdie's novel has been adapted as a film released worldwide in 2012. Other literary works such as Qureshi's The Buddha of Suburbia, Ondarji's Running in the Family, and Hamid's The Reluctant Fundamentalist are international bestsellers and critically acclaimed novels. Moreover, Qureshi's novel has been televised in Britain and Hamid's novel has been adapted into a film that was released worldwide in early 2012. Now he divides Indian diasporic writings into two forms, writings emerging from forced migration and writings emerging from voluntary migration. And he dwells at length, that he talks in detail about Bharti Mukherjee's Desirable Daughters. These diasporic texts assess the making and growth of the cultural production of South Asian diasporic works globally. The two films, Bend It Like Beckham and The Namesake, engaged with gender and the post-colonial complexities of diaspora. Desai's book, for instance, looks at South Asian diasporic films in order to analyze the representation of diasporic identities, homeland and the hostland experiences with the aim of understanding the rise of diasporic cinema, locating it outside the globally popular movie industries of Hollywood and Bollywood. Dr. Banerjee states that Indian films refers to the wider corpus of cinematic films produced within India from the earliest days of film production. Bollywood, derived from the combination of Hollywood and Bombay, is a tongue-in-cheek term created by the English language press in India in the late 1970s. The international flavor and slightly more westernized production values make them particularly exportable to the global Indian diaspora. Dr. Banerjee also focuses on the aspect that Hindi cinema since the mid 1990s has embraced the expatriate community. Along with telling the expatriate stories to the burgeoning audience for these films, Hindi cinema is also openly utilizing the diasporic characters as a safer experimental platform to negotiate complex issues of identity, gender, sexuality, religion, and regional national politics that affect its domestic audiences. At the same time, these films are establishing popular representation of the diaspora and questioning their cultural connectedness to their homeland. Because of the socio-political impact of these films, the non-resident Indians is defined within the conventions of Hindi film narratives, and the growing visibility of the diaspora within the cinema has begun changing those very narratives. The term Bollywood is used in a positive manner that defines it as a globalized multicultural film tradition. Accordingly, it is used strictly in reference to the Mumbai Hindi film industry, which has dominated India's film-going culture and is making its mark on the international stage via diaspora-themed movies. And he talks about 3 movies: Kal Ho Na Ho, Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, Kabhi Khushi, Kabhi Gum. He says that these films, they reflect on the deep-rooted Indian culture, and the cast portrayed are totally aware of Indian culture and traditional values. Thank you. I congratulate Dr. Banerjee for such an stimulating, interesting, and fruitful deliberation. Thank you once again, and I extend my thanks to iSPELL India and Ghanshyam sir once again for providing me the opportunity to chair the session. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
madam.
you, ma'am.
Thank you, madam. It was a very wonderful and a very detailed remarks, ma'am. Now, I would like to invite President of iSPELL, Professor Anupama Vora, madam, to have concluding remarks and present away the certificates.
Thank you, Madam Sanmitra. It was wonderful listening to Dr. Sourav Banerjee. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Very well researched presentation, Sourav, and you covered all aspects. And it was very interesting, the comparison or the diaspora and how they are being represented in the Bollywood. I must congratulate you on behalf of iSPELL for this illuminating talk. And although Madam Sarita Jain, the chairperson, has wonderfully given her remarks, but one thing which was there in my mind right from the very beginning, which I would like to share with you all, because I don't want to take much of the time, is that when we talk about diaspora now in the present time, when you go abroad, what we read in the works, in the creative writings, and what we watch through the Bollywood movies, apart from that, when we visit countries in the West like UK, US, and others, what we find is that mini India is there. And what I have observed in Canada is that it is not only mini India, but it is mini Punjab, mini South India, you can say mini West Bengal, mini Maharashtra. And one thing which I appreciate about the diaspora and which I would like to share with you all on this from this platform is that it is not only the Indian diaspora, but the diaspora, the collective Asian diaspora. When you go abroad and you meet someone and they say, well, we are from Asia, the Indians and the Pakistanis, the Afghanistanis, we are all brothers. That is one best thing about these diasporas. Thank you so much, Madam Sarita Jain, for chairing the session, and Sangmitra for being the master of ceremonies. Thank you. And on behalf of iSPELL, it is an equally memorable and momentous time today that this association was started by Professor Ghanshyam and a few like-minded persons like him, Dr. Prasanta Chakravarti and Ashok Sachdeva sir, Payal madam and others. I can't name all. And it is completing it 2 years. So this Sunday Sahityik Satsang has a great significance, and iSPELL feels honored in presenting the certificate to Dr. Sourav Banerjee. Thank you, Sourav, for your presentation, and you are a part of iSPELL from the West Bengal Forum, and we look forward to listening to more from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your kind words and the certificate and the opportunity for letting me speak. Thank you very much.
iSPELL feels honored in presenting the certificate of appreciation to Dr. Sarita Jain for chairing the session and for her illuminating concluding remarks. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, ma'am, for the honor. Thank you.
And thank you, Sangmitra, for being the MOC today and handling it very well. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's an honor from you, ma'am.
And we look forward to all of you joining us next Sunday for another academic feast. And thank you, Pramod, for being the spine, as I repeatedly say in all the iSPELL Sunday Sahityik Satsangs, whenever I get the opportunity, that well, it is Pramod's dedication that we all meet on this virtual platform every Sunday. Thank you, Pramod.
Thank you, ma'am.
Now comes the, once again, let me take the opportunity. Esteemed speaker, Dr. Sourav Banerjee, Chairperson Dr. Sarita Jain, invited guests, and all the valued participating members, I am yet again privileged to extend a hearty vote of thanks on behalf of the entire team of iSPELL India. Our sincere gratitude goes to the Honorable Speaker of today's event, Dr. Sourav Banerjee, for gracing the event with a valuable analysis and illuminating talk on such a diverse yet a very interesting topic. Thank you, sir. I must extend Thank you, sir. I must extend our deep sense of appreciation for Chairperson Dr. Sarita Jain for giving valuable and a very detailed remarks. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
I offer my sincere respect and gratitude to Madam Anupama Vora, President iSPELL, and Professor G.A. Ghanshyam, Founder and General Secretary of iSPELL India, always and always. And my sincere thanks goes to Sir Pramod M. Dhingles, the IT coordinator, iSPELL, and also the event coordinator of today's event for his kind cooperation. I also take this opportunity to thank all the participants for being here with us today, and we look forward to your kind participation in the coming events. Thank you so much. Last but not the least, I thank iSPELL India and iSPELL Assam Forum for believing in me to be the MOC of today's event. Thank you everyone. Sir, Pramod sir,
Yes, ma'am.
So with the permission of the president and
I express my great thanks to Sangamitra ma'am for wonderfully handling and managing the event. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Sourav sir. Thank you, Sarita ma'am. Thank you, Anupama ma'am. Thank you,
Thank you
Shanta,
so much, sir.
present here, and all the participants. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
we wind